You're listening to Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. My goal is to help individuals like you explore various ways to fully transform your life from the inside out. Welcome to another edition of Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. Today, my guest is Sarah Taylor. Sarah is a Los Angeles-based stand-up comedian and actor and has been a spiritual mentor and energy healing practitioner for over 10 years. After undergoing a series of profound, radical, and abiding inner shifts, today she is a catalyst for people to turn inward to realize and live the radiance of their true nature. She has been seen on NBC, CBS, ABC, and all the top comedy clubs like the Laugh Factory, the Improv, the Comedy Store, and more. Check out her TED Talk and her interview on Buddha at the Gas Pump to learn more. I'll be putting all of those links in the show notes. I'm so excited to have Sarah on the show. I've been thinking about her for years. It's going to be a great interview. I'll see you on the flip side. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. Today my guest is Sarah Taylor. Yay!
Yay! Hi!
Hi! So I have to tell everyone a little story, and I'm going to make it short. I went on a long meditation course, I think it's been 5 or 6 years ago. And I had a very extreme experience on this course. They call it a spiritual emergency. And I had so much energy running through my body. I literally thought that my head was going to blow off my body. It was like taking acid, having a nervous breakdown, and having a heart attack, all at once. So that was that fun experience. Fast forward a couple of years, and I saw your interview with Rick Archer on Buddha at the Gas Pump, which, by the way, is an awesome show for spiritual people having experiences. And I can't tell you how much it helped me.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, I'm glad too, because I couldn't find anyone that really understood what happened to me. I did start working with an old TM teacher that's a therapist that actually studied with Adyashanti for years.
Yeah.
So he was able to help me, but it was few and far between the number of people that were out there that truly understood what happened to me. And when I saw your interview, well, I knew that you understood because it happened to you. I mean, it was different, but the same. So that's how I found you.
That's great. Yeah, I remember you contacting me after that. I was like, she's cool. She's cool. Who is this lady? Well, yeah, I think that there's kind of a division, which we were talking a little bit about before. There's, the non-duality camp, which is all about enlightenment and, seeing through the separate self or ego and into our true nature and the unity and oneness of all things that we are. And then there's this other camp in spirituality, these, just two prevalent ones, that's like super new agey.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's trying to hone their psychic gifts and everybody wants a spirit guide. And, and there's a lot of talk of energy. And so I have sort of bounced between those two camps, kind of not really feeling at home with either one, because I feel like the non-duality camp often overlooks that these CDs, or, what you were saying that you had taken the CD course, psychic abilities, energetic awakenings, sometimes they're part of the path of enlightenment, the path of realizing non-duality, and we can't ignore it. And then with the New Age camp, the New Agers, sometimes it's a lot of details and a lot of fuss and not the substance, like the real foundation of, well, why are we all doing this? It's to wake up. It's to wake up,
But until you have a taste of that experience, because I had always been interested in spirituality my whole life, but I remember focusing on Christian mystics, and I was a theology major in college and taking that route, that path to God, but I had never had any of these experiences. I mean, little glimpses of it, but it wasn't until I had a full out transformation, learning to meditate, and where my whole life changed, that I really began to understand this is real. An awakening is real. It will change your whole life and you will never be the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but before it was like I just had knowledge, like I was just reading about stuff, but it was very different when it actually happened to me.
Well, direct experience, that's the path of the mystics, is direct experience of God, direct experience of our true nature, our spirit. And so until then, it's intellectual, mental knowledge that we're collecting,
Right, which can get in the way. I mean, it left me more
Totally.
confused sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I kept
I was an atheist. I was like I had no belief, which is a belief in and of itself, right? But I was like, there's no God. Like people would say, the word God, and I go, ugh, ugh. Like I'd roll my eyes like I was that person. And, I started meditating and having direct experiences of what, I now know to be my true nature, my essence, God essence,
Mhm.
And so through direct experience, we really know instead of know up
Really
here.
hmm It's like
Yeah.
Christ. I'm just using Christ as an example, is like living in your heart, and it like
Yeah.
penetrates up to your brain and it takes over just like regular knowledge.
Yeah.
It's like
So
true inner
visceral.
knowledge.
Yeah. 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 It's an inner knowledge that gets lived through this vessel and
Mhm.
experienced, not just a passing thing.
No, because like I said, there really is no going back after that. You've seen the light
Mhm.
in a way, like the
Yeah.
Blues Brothers. I mean, you've seen it. You can't like deny it. And
Yeah.
um, the name of the game, like you said in Rick's interview, is surrender. You have to start surrendering to this because it takes over, and your life
Yeah.
really is not your own.
It really isn't. Surrender's so key. And, I think a lot of like just modern people living in big cities, awakenings are happening. And I think it's important also to sort of like say like what we mean when we talk about awakening, because again, awakening is used in all different spiritual camps and it means different things. Sometimes awakening to somebody can mean, awakening to, that there is God,
Mm-hmm.
that there is something larger than us. And my goodness, that is definitely an awakening. Um, but so the awakenings that we're talking about are awakening of identity, where we wake up out of the identity of ego or separate self and realize ourselves as something vaster, more mysterious, that is not other than God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, just living in Los Angeles here, I meet and work with people who are, excuse me, in the process of having awakenings or have had some sort of awakening experience. And they're not surrendered. They're not like, oh yeah, this is the focus of my life now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're like, no, why can't I just go about my life the way I was with my dysfunctional relationships or maybe the career that drives me crazy and depletes me, and going after all the things that my peers are going after, which kind of feels hollow to me, but everybody's doing it. So and it's like, it creates such a conflict.
Well, your
Um,
ego does not like these experiences because you've been lying to yourself in a way, like, this is who I am. I'm a lawyer and I have a
mhm,
wife and 2.5 kids and I live in
mhm.
the suburbs and I'm successful. And all of that gets blown up
Yeah,
and your ego does not like it. And it tries to grip onto that old you, that false self.
totally.
And that's when the pain really sets in.
Yeah, I think, uh, yes, it's that reassembling of the ego, or the self. And what's so funny is like, because sometimes people will ask me like on this journey, it's like, you know, um, I don't know, like I've lost everything
Mm-hmm.
and then gained everything. And I've come right back full circle. I usually have this necklace that's a circle to just remind me like what a full circle job this is.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in the middle of that journey, or you're kind of flailing about, you either can't imagine going back to doing the things that you did before, or kind of living a quote unquote normal, just a regular life, um, or you're clinging so tightly to get back to your quote unquote regular, normal life. But a full circle thing happens when this whole process matures, where you're like, oh, then true nature inhabits the self, the vessel. And maybe you are still a lawyer with 2.5 kids and the same husband, but it's a vastly, vastly different experience. It's truth living your life now, not, you know, this illusion of who you thought you were, you know, being so attached and identified with all your roles. And um, so yeah, and as you know, I mean, you've watched all of, you know, a lot of Rick's interviews. Sometimes people don't go back to doing what they were doing, you know, when this whole thing started, or their life is radically turned upside down, so that the details of their life does look different, like 5 years later or 10 years later.
Yeah, because you change so much, and unless you're with a person that understands or are changing with you, like, I think it's hard to stay in relationships, in jobs, in places where you're living, because you're so radically different. And you're confused too, especially if it happens fast. Like it did to me. I was like, what the hell's going on? I mean, it took me years to understand what had occurred, because it was such a paradigm shift, but everything in my life changed. I mean, and I couldn't stop that train. Again, I had to just surrender to whatever was being put in front of me and just like walk into my destiny. It's not, I felt like, in a way, like this was already like pre-planned. It was like, this is the gig. This is what you're going to do. I don't want to hear any nonsense from you. And I just kind of obeyed that thing inside of me because I trusted it.
That's really good. A lot of people don't. I mean, that's actually, yeah, something was guiding me to like really, really trust it, even though I wouldn't call it a spiritual impulse in the beginning. I mean, but it sounds like you grew up in a home with faith and you know, being raised with a spiritual outlook, right?
I did. My mom was an ex-nun. She wrote mystical poetry. She introduced me to all these types of thinking and made me understand that you can have direct experiences with God. But, you know, again, like thinking about the mystics and stuff, that was so far away from who I was. I was this like party girl, you know, crazy. I was so wild, and my house there was a lot of trauma with my brother and just all the different personalities. So much was happening, and I was really sensitive, but, and I was taking it all in, but at the same time I thought like, well, that would never happen to me. I mean, we're talking about someone living in a cave, you know, in India. That's not me.
Totally. Yeah. And I thought that too, when I started studying Buddhism. I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense to me. Like everything that I was reading and practicing, and you know, I had friends who were kind of studying it too, and they were like, did you even understand that talk? And I was like, yes. I don't know how, but yeah, you know, like it was from just being like this total non spiritual person to wanting to learn meditation so that I could sleep better at night, have less anxiety. I mean, it was off and running. So I would say that it happened fast for me too. I mean, you know, I had a very, very busy mind, a lot of anxiety, panic attacks, was diagnosed with a mood disorder, which, you know, later we found out is not really a correct diagnosis. I've been off all medication for 15 years. So, you know, it was a lot of unhealed trauma. You know,
this all started because of things happening in your life when you were a child, or do you think you were just born sensitive and open and people didn't understand what was really going on? Or was it a combo platter of both?
you know, I always think it's a combo platter, but I do find that, you know, people who grow up in really kind of unstable homes for whatever reason, they become very porous because we have to for our survival.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to become very intuitive, and we have to be able to be so empathic and to put ourselves in other people's shoes to anticipate, you know, whether or not we're going to be safe.
Yeah, I always describe it. It's like, it's the only way to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you're a little kid and all this stuff is going on in your house, which the majority of us had crazy houses, like, let's get real.
Sure.
And you're sensitive, like, you better lean on that intuition to keep yourself safe, or to know when to get out of the house, or whatever you need to do. But that adds up inside of you.
Oh,
It
sure.
gets pushed down, and when it explodes out of you, we're entering a danger zone.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important that people get into therapy. Like, sometimes people will come to work with me and they'll want me as a spiritual mentor or teacher and want to do healing work with me. And I always ask, what was your upbringing like? Are you in therapy? Have you been in therapy? What do you feel your biggest, patterns are in life? And what are your triggers? And because it's because you can start to do spiritual work and things can really start opening up for people. And, we need a healthy container. Our mind really kind of does need to be on board. It helps for us to kind of at least intellectually understand our story. With true awakening, we transcend and go beyond our story. We see through our story and our story falls away along with our identity, who we thought we were. But at the same time, having some sort of container for that. And I didn't have really any of that. I had started therapy maybe a couple of years before. I mean, I had seen some psychiatrists and I don't know, like sliding scale kind of mental health people when I was in my 20s who just barely listened to what I had to say and was like, oh, you're depressed, and oh, your family has a history of bipolar. Okay, you're bipolar too. Like that,
thanks.
I was like, thanks. But you know what but seriously, I was like, okay, that's what's wrong with me. And I sort of took on that identity. I took on that label.
But what do you think was really going on?
Well, it was just unhealed trauma.
And it was just, you were acting out because of it, having highs, lows.
I was depressed. I wasn't actually having the highs and lows. What was happening, I mean, now looking back and, of course, having many psychotherapists since and talking to people, and all of them shake their head and they're like, there's no way you're bipolar too. There's no way. Is that the anxiety, there was just anxiety and depression constantly and like a seesaw. So if I was depressed, thank God I wasn't feeling the anxiety. But as soon as the depression would lift, the anxiety would return.
But they go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. And, I would spend, weeks barely able to get out of bed from the depression. So of course, when the depression would start to lift and anxiety would rear its head, well, great, now I can get some shit done. And so it could appear to the outside that I was manic, but I think there's a lot of nuance to mental health diagnosis, and I just don't meet the criteria of it, now over the years. But I think at the time, not having any money, living in Los Angeles, going to a low-cost clinic I remember seeing this guy and I was like, I can't stop crying. And I had this depressive episode that came about, and I kind of talked about it with Rick, but I was in massage school, just come out of acting school, a 4-year acting conservatory. And I was studying massage because every actor needs a day job. So I was studying massage, and I had what I now feel was a Kundalini awakening. Which is an energetic release from the base of your spine of your Kundalini energy. When I would put my hands on people in class, I would feel this bliss and this energy running through me. The instructors didn't really know what I was talking about. I tried to talk about it, and then I was like, oh, they're not feeling this, so I'll just shut up. But I, was having kind of these expansive experiences. And then the course ended and I wasn't putting my hands on people. So I guess there wasn't a reason for, energy to be moving through me, or I don't know, I guess it was that putting my hands on people somehow ignited my own energy. Kundalini is the personal energy, as you know. It just, and then I crashed. I went into a depression. So I could not stop crying, but it was a lot of my trauma coming up. A lot of my childhood stuff was coming up, but I was kind of repressing it. And I had always sort of walked around saying like, oh yeah, my family's fine, because that was the story I was fed. We're normal. Everything's fine.
Right.
Sure, your siblings are trying to kill you, and your, mother is deeply mentally ill and, has mood swings and is, angry at you and psychologically, emotionally abusive. But,
but if that's your norm, if that's all I mean, I didn't know that we were bonkers in our family. Like, I just was like, this is how it is. And everyone's family is crazy. But, you know, when you're dealing with serious issues like that, that has a profound effect on your mental health, your nervous system,
Totally.
the choices you make in your life, everything. It doesn't, you have to work through it because the only way out is through.
The only way out is through. But I didn't, you know, I so bought into like the, you know, what I'm, you know, I had a fine family life. It must be me. Why am I so unhappy? Why am I so in fight or flight all the time? Well, my childhood, I was in fight or flight or freeze all the time. There was a lot of emotional abuse and some physical abuse, and the threat, the feeling that my life was threatened was just kind of a daily thing, whether it was actually threatened or not. A child developing, I mean, it's called complex PTSD, which you're familiar with from a very, very young age. From probably the womb, there was a feeling that I was not safe in my home. So, you know, everybody did the best they could, of course, but it's helpful to, you know, take note of what the blueprint is that's been left on us. But yeah, I was, you know, I would just go into these really deep depressions. And then when I wasn't depressed, I had tons of anxiety running through me. And I went to a very low cost clinic here in Los Angeles. And I went in and I was like, I'm just crying. I can't stop crying. I'm so sad. The doctor was like, just looking down at his notepad, anything you're sad about? And I'm like, no, just everything. And he's like, okay. And he wrote down, you're depressed. I'm going to put you on antidepressants. And I said, oh, by the way, my sister was diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. And he crossed off depression. He said, okay, I think you're bipolar 2, but just take this.
And what happened to you when he said that?
I felt some sort of false relief, like, oh, this is what's wrong with me. And so I wore that identity for 10 years.
And took the meds?
Oh, I took the meds. Yeah.
What does that feel like to take medicine like that when you don't actually have that problem?
Well, I can't ever say that it made my life better. It made my life worse. And that's one of the ways, you know, if somebody is truly, you know, has a mood disorder or has some sort of diagnosis, and, you know, they've done so many tests and studies that, you know, certain medications are good for that type of diagnosis, and people usually do benefit from medications. I think the big tip-off was that I got worse, but nobody that I was really seeing, because I didn't, you know, I was like a broke actor in LA, going to all these low-cost places. Nobody really caught on that it wasn't working. I was on a mood stabilizer. I was on 2 different antidepressants. The antidepressants never really worked. They never really lifted me in any way that really felt it was substantial. The mood stabilizer tended to numb me out.
So make you a little flat feeling?
Yeah, so I became very flat. And the whole time I was like, but I still feel like there's something. So just to kind of cut to the end of this, because I mean, my God, we could go on and on about the
I just lost you. Your sound. Oh, there you are. Okay.
There I am.
Yep.
But yeah, I could go on and on about that time in my life. It was about 10 years that I call the couch years. The couch years, because I was just sort of stuck on the couch. And
maybe you needed that in a way.
Totally. I mean, I had a boyfriend at the time who was very loving and very kind, and he was very nurturing. And so it was, I'm, you know, looking back, I'm sure we were playing out some sort of karmic, you know, thing for each other, where he, you know, really helped me. And I got to a place where I, you know, felt safe and felt loved, which is something that, you know, maybe I didn't have earlier in my life. So there was kind of this cocooning happening, but there wasn't any inner work going on. I wasn't in therapy. I was just numbed out on these medications. And I was seeing a psychiatrist at Cedars-Sinai, their kind of low-cost clinic. And I had started to do some research on the internet, and I was finding like, you know, there are other medications out there, and there are other things that seem to be helping people. So I asked him if he thought it was a good idea for me to start lowering my medication. And he was like, yeah, I think you're a great candidate for that. And so we just started lowering my dosages.
Uh-huh.
And it got to a point where my dosage was so low and I was actually improving
Oh my
that
God.
I went to him and I said, hey, I want to get off all of this stuff. I want to, my plan is to take a meditation class so that that can support me.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'm starting to, you know, for the past like 3 or 4 years that I've been lowering this dosage, I've been feeling better and better and better. I feel like there's something else going on, like maybe I need therapy. So I'm going to get into therapy and learn meditation. And I was like, what do you think of that? Do you think that's okay? And he said, yes, I think that a psychiatrist at Cedars-Sinai was like, yes, I think that's a great idea. I mean, he probably couldn't say, you know what, I think you shouldn't have been diagnosed with this. I've been going along with this protocol because that's been your diagnosis, but it's not.
That's the scary part.
I know.
And that he didn't tell you before, like, hey, let's do a little combination of psychotherapy and meds, which is proven to help people.
Yeah.
But I mean, he had to have known somewhere inside of him, like, this gal doesn't need to be on all these drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just come to him. I was like, hey, I was reading this thing online and I was reading this and like, you know, well, what do you think about this medication or lowering it to this dosage? And, you know, I was learning that the efficacy level is da, 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 da for, you know, like I was just trying to educate myself.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really like, yeah, go for it. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, because you cannot just like stop that type of medication. Like that would not be good. I mean, I had, back to what you said before, if you need medicine, it will save your life. I cannot imagine my brother not being on. I mean, I saw my brother not take his meds and it was very scary. I mean, it pretty much always led to a stay at a psychiatric hospital. Like that's where it led. So that to me proved that he needed to be on medication. But for you, it was the opposite. The lower you went, the better you're feeling. It's like, all right, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And so tell me what therapy did for you, because I went into therapy too, and it changed my life. The combination of the spiritual practice with therapy was beautiful.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Well, you know, with the therapy I had in the beginning, I then switched to a different therapist who went deeper into early trauma so that we could really unravel that and I could heal that. But the first few years of therapy went hand in hand with me studying Buddhism and practicing. And it was all very present day focused. So we would just look at, you know, what patterns am I getting tripped up by in my present day? And, you know, how does this relate to the Buddhist teachings? And, you know, how can we look at this differently? You know, in combination with the kind of mindfulness that just Buddhist practice brings forward, I was starting to become very aware of my present day habits and patterns that get in my way. So all the ways that I get in my way, you know, but it only went so far because I did need to discover why those habits and patterns formed in the first place.
Like where they came from. And
where they came from. And that was so helpful. And I think because I didn't start out therapy with like, tell me about your childhood and let's, you know, wallow in that, like, you know, I don't feel I ever was indulgent, looking back now, about the childhood stuff. I dealt with it insofar as like, okay, I'm not here to blame anybody or, you know, any of that. I just want to undo and untangle the web that I find myself in as an adult. And
I mean, it's unfucking yourself, really.
Yeah, it's unfucking yourself.
It is, because you can't get away from it if you don't deal with it.
Yeah.
It'll leak into every area of your life.
Yeah. And it really, it can be harmful because I think what can be harmful is sort of this attitude of that sometimes, you know, when people who are on the spiritual path, like, well, it's just, I'm so compassionate. And I forgive my parents and I forgive everybody and it's all fine. And I don't want to go into it. Yes, of course, forgiveness and compassion can come if your eyes are open and you understand the imprint that's been left on you. So you know, I don't know, sometimes, yeah, like I've worked with people over the years who are like, you know, clearly like they've been very traumatized, and usually I'll send them to a trauma therapist. I won't work with them. But if they're really kind of caught up in the like, well, you know, everybody's doing the best they can, and, you know, you know, I don't want to blame anybody, and I don't want to, you know, but it's so clear that this person had like early traumas that they just need to unpack in a very non-judgmental way.
Yeah, you don't want any spiritual bypassing going on, because that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
No.
And so when I finally could say, oh, hey, this is the environment that I was raised in, and it created this type of person that I am taking responsibility for. I take responsibility for how I am and how I move through the world now. And I want to do something about it.
It's empowering.
It is empowering. It is.
Did you do like EMDR therapy or anything specific, or was it just talk therapy that got you through?
I never did EMDR, although I do know people who've done it, and I've recommended clients to go do it, and they say wonderful things. Have you done it?
That's what I did.
Nice.
I went into therapy after I learned to meditate, even though I had this incredible experience. Something inside of me said, you know what, you've been through a lot, so you should take care of this. And I felt that because I had this spiritual edge going on, I don't know how else to describe it, that I was able to work through things much faster than if I didn't have that perspective. It allowed me to kind of step back and look at what had happened to me and see it with like fresh eyes. And it wasn't as, I was a little bit more in charge of my emotional health. And
yeah, I think that's important that you had that background, that foundation of the meditation practice.
It helped me so much. I always tell people just do both, because you have that witnessing quality thing happening. So you're not like out of control with your emotions, because this can bring up so much stuff. So that was helpful to me. And then after that meditation course, I went back into therapy, and that's when we did EMDR, because so much trauma was coming out of me that I could not grasp it no matter what.
Sweetie. Wow.
So, it worked. But it worked.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So you were really flooded with it.
I was set on fire with trauma. And I thought I had it all figured out. I was past it. I had gone to therapy, you know, I felt great. And my body just, you know, your body doesn't forget, you know that. And it didn't forget. And it let me know that I'm not going to let you get away with not dealing with this.
Yeah, the body's the last stop. I mean, the mind, our consciousness can, you know, clearly see what has happened, and you know what's going on now currently that echoes the original events. But yeah, I feel like, you know, when you have a meditation practice, yeah, you can be a bit of the witness to it, rather than getting overwhelmed by it. But also, it's so important to just feel it. I mean, there, as you've probably found, there's then the stages beyond witnessing where the witness falls away. And so that is often when people really get to know the trauma that's held in their body. Because to see the trauma, to know the trauma intellectually, emotionally is one thing, but then the body has to release it. And it's the last stop. It's the last place where trauma is held.
Yeah, your nervous system takes a real goddamn beating when these types of things happen to you. But when you start having information about what's happening to you, you start doing more reading and you see a therapist that's informed, you start to get on the program and you really can heal yourself. And it's what you talked about in Rick's interview, like doing energy work, spiritual practice, therapy, all of these things must happen. It's you're kind of like at war with yourself a little bit till you can dampen the fire. And then you get with the program and then you're like, okay, I know what's happening now. You're a little bit more informed, and slowly, you become stronger than you ever were.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, everybody's got a different path with healing trauma. And I think for me, because, you because there were these phases of awakening. There was sort of the first chapter of the awakening I went through, which was around 2009, 10, 11. And then the later chapter of awakening, which was 2016, where because my location point, my, my identity was falling away. The identity of the me, of the separate suffering Sarah was dissolving and falling away, and really falling into this greater, vaster spaciousness that I am, that I was realizing and waking up to, that I am. So as the realization of true nature deepened within me, and I could fall into and really sense in an abiding way that this is what I am, not the small, separate, scared, young being that went through all this, that happened, but what I am is this timeless, vast presence. Then all the wounded bits, all the emotional upheaval, all the pain, all the trauma comes home to that. And gets integrated into that vaster space. So
that's a beautiful way of putting it. That's amazing. Yes.
Yeah. So there's room, because we can really get stuck in duality when we're doing trauma work, and like we want to get rid of the part of us that suffered, or we want to get rid of the pain or the trauma or the holding or the bracing. But I've found, I guess, because this trauma work happened in conjunction with a deep, profound, abiding awakening, is that it just kept dissolving into the huge ocean that I am, just dissolving. So it's not even like it went anywhere, but it becomes transmuted, and then integrated.
Yeah, you're a spiritual teacher. Well, to be able to explain it that way, because that's what it is. And it can be abstract and kind of complex, especially when you're going through it, because there's so many moving parts. But really, it does get all integrated, and then it just becomes who you are.
Yeah, the integration piece is super important. And for me, because, when, the kind of the later, chunkier, maybe more primal bits of trauma were being released, with the later stages of the later awakening chapter. I mean, it's never ending. It's always unfolding, right? But I'd say after 2016, any trauma work that I've done since then, it really has had such an easeful feel to it, because there isn't that dichotomy in the beginning. So let's say you are on a spiritual path, especially a non-duality path of enlightenment or awakening. So you're learning that you're not the separate self, you're not the ego, you're not the me, you are what is prior to all existence itself, and you're having glimpses of that or experiences of that. But if somebody is still quite identified with the separate me, but is longing to move deeper into the realization of non-duality, there can become a bit of a fight, in that people do, as you just said, spiritually bypass. Like, well,
it feels better.
It feels better to be like, well, yeah, that happened when I was 5. I fell off my bike and a truck ran me over, whatever kind of trauma, that didn't happen to me. But, whatever trauma we experience when we're young that leaves an imprint, it didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to anyone, because there's no one here. There never was. There's only just pure spirit. It's like, yeah. Then why, are relationships difficult for you, and your body tenses when somebody challenges you, Right. So if somebody, there can be a kind of a fight that goes on, sometimes where people don't want to look at their very human bits. But I feel very fortunate, because when I started working with the trauma, I looked at it as if, or how I approached it was, me as true nature, as vast, spacious, pure consciousness that I am, sits here. I can hold and love those bits of pain that arise, the confused parts of me, the you know, the split off parts that feel wounded or like they have to protect themselves, or like, you know, the traumatized parts, you know, and hold that space. So that's why whenever somebody is doing trauma work, I think also it's really important that they have the spiritual stuff going on, like the deep spiritual teachings.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find therapists that have both, but they are out there. And there's so many wonderful teachers. I know you really like Adyashanti. I love Amma. You know, there's people out there that can help you on an energetic level also and give you knowledge.
Yes.
But it's nice to have a therapist that kind of knows what you're talking about too. If
Totally. And I had a therapist for like 4 years after the shift in 2011, after the awakening shift in 2011, who, you know, is spiritual, but she had not had any of these experiences. But she was just on board. Like she got it in some way that I'm so grateful for. And then, you know, of course, working with a trauma-based psychotherapist, to anybody listening, I highly recommend. I love Dr. Julie Brown Yao. I love her work. And she's spoken at the SAND conference before.
She has really long blonde hair.
Yeah.
Okay,
and,
yeah, I met her.
Very awake woman who has a lot of training in therapy and trauma. And I mean, we've had some incredible conversations, and I was just like, why hasn't Rick interviewed you? And so anyway, I reached out to Rick. I was like, he's got it. He just did, because I bugged him. But I was like, please talk about trauma and awakening, because it's so important. But, you know, like what Julie does and so many other people, you know, who really are informed about trauma, it's about us getting in our body. You know, it's about, you know, inhabiting this body and coming to a point where we actually feel safe in our body, that it's safe to be here. And you can be this vast, spacious consciousness. You can know yourself to be true nature, who is inhabiting this body, you know, this body that is
we have
relaxed
these
and clear.
spacesuits. We're born here. This is the deal. Like, I think turning your back on being a human, that really doesn't do you any good. It's like, you have to accept, like, you're going to have traumas and you're going to have bad days and you're going to have all sorts of wacky things happen. And to learn to be able to deal with that as it comes, it's just so helpful. And that's what therapy does for you. And that's what a spiritual practice does for you. You're able to really ride the wave a little bit more, because life will always have ups and downs. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. It's part of the gig. And to turn your back on that, I don't see how that's helpful. At least that's not how I could play it. So I have another question.
Yeah.
I always see you with your husband on Facebook. So I can tell you guys really love each other, and it's beautiful to see it. So I wanted to ask you about being on this path, doing this type of work, and being in relationship with someone. Like, what does that look like?
Oh, girl, do we have 2 more hours? Well, you know, it's interesting. You and I were talking about how, like, you know, when a real, true, profound awakening happens, you know, sometimes you know, people they don't stay with the person that they're with, or, you know, friendships change. I know my friendships changed, and, you know, I started gravitating towards what felt true for me. I met him at the Comedy Store where I was performing, and he came up to me and was like, "Hey, you're funny." and I was like, "You're cute, but you're too young for me. Get out of the way." He's younger than me. And we just started hanging around. And I was only a few years into my spiritual path. Well, I guess it's been a while now, but so I've known him for over 10 years. And so I've been on the spiritual path, I guess, 13 or 14 years. So I do feel like it's happened fast for me. All the stuff that we're talking about happened like in the beginning. But he has been totally on board the whole time, which doesn't mean to say that it's been easy, but within a year of us getting together, and of course, when I met him, I was like, hey, spirituality is super important to me. I study Buddhism. I go on meditation retreats. this is something that's really important to me. And he was like, well, that's great, because, he's Indian and
Mm-hmm.
was raised in a home where, his family, honors and delights in so many religious traditions and spiritual traditions. And so he was like, that's great. So we felt that immediately. I felt like there was a spiritual connection immediately with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt that for me as well. I mean, I guess it took me a little bit longer. They say that with women are always a little bit longer. I don't know, but he was like, oh no, I knew. Um, but so we started dating. We couldn't really say dating because we just like dove in immediately with each
Mm-hmm.
other. And within a year and a half, I went away to a meditation retreat, and the me that I had taken myself to be dissolved. And so that, for those listening, that's considered an awakening, a direct experience of true nature. And it was such a life-altering experience.
Mm-hmm.
I came back, of course, completely shifted,
Mm-hmm.
um, and knowing myself to be something other than what I had always thought myself to be, sort of knowing myself first and foremost as emptiness. Within the TM path, it would be the self-realization shift, probably, or the witnessing consciousness. I don't know if TM says that's cosmic consciousness, but
They have all the different stages.
yeah, all the different stages, which I
It
think,
never made sense to me, like how it was laid out, because I felt like I jumped from one stage to like this stage. So I
oh,
was like,
there
wait,
is a
what?
lot of jumping around. I think that's interesting. I could go off on a tangent here, but I highly recommend David Buckland's book, Our Natural Potential, which talks about the stages of enlightenment. That's kind of in line with the TM model and Hinduism, Vedanta. But in it, he's talked to so many people on this path, and he and I have had long conversations. Where he's cataloging kind of direct experience, people's
Mhm.
direct experiences. People jump around for sure. It's linear and it's also not linear, so it's
Mhm.
both, right? But so I had experienced this shift, so everything was upside down. Suddenly, everything fell away,
Mhm.
and that was okay. I was free. It was freeing.
Mhm.
And he didn't fall away, and our relationship didn't fall away. I felt very bonded to him, but how I related to him had changed. How I related to my friends had changed. How I related to myself. I mean, it was like I was getting to know somebody brand new who
Mhm.
had been here all along, of
Mhm.
course, but I was getting to know somebody brand new. But what had happened on that retreat is that I became aware um, that early childhood trauma, had left a devastating imprint on me.
Mhm.
And as I realized that on the retreat, then the last day of the retreat was when the awakening happened. So it was
Mhm.
as if I saw the effects of my whole life, of who I had been and who this Sarah creature was, this character experiencing all these things that left such an imprint. And I could see the weight of the imprint of the trauma, and cause and effect, and all sorts of experiences and societal messages and familial messages, and everything just sort of weighted down on this being, and I
Mhm.
just saw it all go poof.
That's incredible.
So it was like I was seeing my trauma for the first time, and seeing what kind of imprint was left on me, and then seeing through it all
Mhm.
into that actually what I am is something deeper and more vaster and more true. And I was in this very expanded, deep place when I came back from the meditation retreat, but some wise voice inside me said, you know, you're going to have to get in therapy, like find a different therapist, and like really start working through this, so that you can heal this, so that
Mhm.
you can heal what has been seen. So there was a simultaneous journey that begun, that my poor dear now husband had to witness,
Mhm.
which was me working through my childhood trauma, trying to navigate a spiritual awakening. And at that point, I didn't have a teacher who really understood what was going on. When I did talk to people about it, they're like, oh my God, you had this amazing awakening. Why are you talking about your childhood? right? So spiritual bypassing.
Right, right.
Yeah. So got into therapy, did not have a spiritual teacher for a while. And my husband, then boyfriend at the time, really watched me kind of go through a very painful time once the kind of honeymoon period fades a bit after an initial awakening. You know, so like within 6 to 8 months or 10 months, you know, there was a lot of pain coming forward and a lot of, you know, and I don't blame him. Even he was like, you just had this amazing thing happen at this meditation retreat. Why are you, what's going on? And I knew that I had to find another therapist. I did. I found somebody wonderful, Beth Leadham, ladies and gentlemen, in Encino. She's fantastic. And
sorry, my dog is barking her tail off. Hey, okay. She's like, yay for this conversation.
She's like,
okay.
yay. Excited. So
he found a therapist.
Yeah, he had to kind of watch me navigate an awakening simultaneously with like healing my childhood trauma.
But he was on board and supportive and all those.
He was on board, supportive. You know, sometimes he has had a different journey. I think he came in kind of very awake. And so he doesn't feel like a separate self to him, you know, as we've talked, but for him, that's always kind of how it's been for him. He, I think there are some people who just kind of come in with it, and because he, you know, had a pretty good upbringing and loving family and was nurtured, and his spiritual side was nurtured, he was able to sort of integrate that and kind of let that settle. And so he was, at times he was sort of like, whoa, like, what is going on with you? You know?
Because it's a wild ride, and especially if someone's watching it.
It's a wild ride. And he was there for all the psychic stuff that began opening up, because after this shift in consciousness, this shift in identity occurred on the meditation retreat. Then I, you know, a few days after I got home from this meditation retreat let me just recap. I had this meditation retreat happened where I saw clearly that trauma had left an imprint on me and that it was time to clean it up. Number two, a big, profound awakening happened where I realized, you know, who I am beyond the me, you know. And a few days after coming home from that meditation retreat, I had a Kundalini awakening, like a Kundalini awakening that felt like it wasn't obstructed, like when I was in my 20s, and it actually reached the crown, and that felt like the Kundalini energy was blowing out. And maybe you can relate to this. I remember feeling like a fire hose had been turned on at my sacrum. And coming up and through and out of me was every dark, sticky gunk from my life ever. So I just lay on the bed feeling this freight train, this fire hose of energy and dark stuff move through me. But I had realized myself to be something that is vaster, deeper, and eternally true. So I could be the witness in that, and I just let it move through me for several hours, I guess. So there was a Kundalini awakening that occurred, and then there was a Universal Shakti awakening that happened, and that Universal Shakti began pouring in through my crown. So within like days of coming home from this retreat in June of 2011, my poor boyfriend at the time, now husband, had to watch me dealing with trauma and awakening, energetic awakening, psychic abilities opened up. I was able to know things about people that I didn't necessarily want to know.
Which is part of the gig. That happens. Which
yeah,
is
sometimes
you got to deal with it. You got to deal with that whole phenomena. If that does happen to you, it can be kind of shocking.
Yeah. And it, you know, sometimes people wait for it to happen and it doesn't so much. So it's like, I always want to just impress upon people that it doesn't, that all the things that I've experienced, that Valerie has experienced, might not be your experience on the path of awakening and healing. Everybody has their own journey.
And really anything is possible. I've learned that.
Anything
I
is
don't know what
possible.
you're going to get. It's like 31 flavors. Like
Totally.
I can't tell you what's going to happen. I can only tell my story and your story.
Yes.
It's just that our stories are very similar.
Totally. Yeah, I know.
Which is interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've met other people with similar stories as well. And then I've met people who like have had kind of smooth awakenings. But I feel like when I talk to them, they're usually like, well, I did a lot of therapy work when I was younger, and or they, had a very kind of rooted feeling in their household growing up. So there was kind of their body could relax. And so when all these crazy things start happening on the path of awakening, this transcendence and the realizing what you are and what you're not, there's a rootedness and a groundedness. So it kind of can move a little more smoothly. But no, there was a period of time, I would say 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, like 5 years where things were hard.
And then how did you decide, like, okay, we're going to get married? Like, how did you get to that point from what you went through to let's get married?
Right. Well, I said, let's break up. And that's what happened.
Okay.
In 2016, we broke up for a while. And that's because so much was falling away. And I mean, I don't need to get into it here, but it's like, I'm writing a book, you'll find out about it. But just to sum it up, we broke up in the spring of 2016. And I hadn't been on a Buddhist meditation retreat in like several years. And I felt called to go on another one. And so, we were broken up, and I went away to a meditation retreat in June of 2016. And that's when the shift into unity consciousness happened. And so, I talk about it in the interview with Rick, and, just a further falling away of who I took myself to be, and a realization that I am everything and everything is me. So, and that was an abiding shift that has not left. And that was a very deep, profound awakening that brought, whereas the awakening in 2011 was sort of like an explosion, like, and even when it happened in 2011, I was like laughing hysterically at the meditation retreat.
Which people do that. They'll like die laughing, or they'll like be crying, or all sorts of things can happen.
Totally. But there were two shifts that happened on the 2016 retreat. One, which we could say is really the unity shift, which actually did feel hilarious to me, because I realized that I am not other than God. I am not other than this awareness that I've always been able to tap into. The awareness that's inside is the same as the awareness that's outside, or God, you could say. And it's all me, like wounded me, God, the trees, everything. And that struck me.
And all of it.
The great perfection, it's all of God. But there was still a sense of me, because with unity, there's still a separation. There's still a slight, there's still the separation is still there. So it would be non-duality, right? But that was a hilarious shift as well, that I ever thought I was other than God. And then the next day on this meditation retreat, there was a deeper falling away of the self. So that it went, the only way I can describe it, it's very hard to describe what happened, but it was going beyond unity into oneness. And, maybe if somebody were to pick it apart, it would be like, well, that's more refined unity or whatever. But it was very profound in that it was a death. I died. Sarah died. But yet, and there were those little deaths on the awakening path before, but this was, oh no.
Bye, Sarah.
Separate Sarah is gone. And she hasn't been back. But, in that we reorient, we're such adaptable creatures, and in time that becomes the new normal. So I just knew myself to be this walking nothingness, this walking emptiness, still not united with everything, just all the same. It's just all the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the earlier unity shift, there was so much differentiation, but there was just this one thing. Now, in the years that have followed, differentiation has returned.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the fabric of it is this one thing. So, it's just these things just keep unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a deeper shift, a more substantial, if you could say, shift, and a more abiding shift, in that there wasn't the vacillating that happened with the earlier shifts. And I did trauma work after that shift too, because then my body was like, oh, great, now you're ready to deal with this bit of trauma and that bit of trauma that you've been holding. And but it was able to be done in such a wide, compassionate space of what I truly am. So almost like mothering myself, and that's what those years after the 2016 shift were really kind of mothering myself. So within all this, my now husband reached out to me and was like, hey, we've been broken up 7 months. How you doing? And I was sort of like, how am I doing? Oh my God.
I'll tell you how I'm doing.
I'll say, holy shit. So we met up again, and we just connected in a different way. And
because you were a different person, really. I mean, fundamentally, you had changed.
Yeah. It's like fundamentally, who I always was now like living through this body, like just.
Oh my God, that's so cool. You have a great way of describing all of this, because it is so abstract that it's hard to get the words out, but you say it so perfectly. I mean, I understand everything you're saying. It mirrors a lot of my experiences, but sometimes it's hard to describe it because it's so profound.
It's very hard to describe the indescribable, especially with these later shifts, these deeper kind of, it's sort of like I look back on like kind of the earlier glimpses that I had, and they were like easier to describe.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets harder and harder to describe these later shifts, at least on my path. So I'm glad that it makes
to get married, to come together with someone. You made space for another person in your life. You weren't so consumed with the interior world that you weren't able to like be with another person.
No, I mean, that's with this shift in 2016, really, I always call it the totality shift, because it was more, there's non-duality, but then there's the totality. And so it includes everything. Nothing is left out, because everything is of the same thingless thinginess, So of course, marriage or relationship, career, working, having a life, money, cars, jobs, cell phones, relationships, mimosas over brunch. I mean, what it's, it's that full circle living thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it made my life a billion times more interesting, because everything was interesting to me. I found humor in everything. I thought like every tree was, incredible. Like there was a new energy in life that I had never experienced before, because it was just God was in everything, so that's the gift. That's the miracle in all of this.
I like the way you put that.
It's a miracle. It's like why we're here on this earth, I think. I mean,
I like that. That's the miracle, that, it's, we get to live this life, and it's so, not just imbued with the divine, it is the divine. It's all a flow of divinity. And it all feels like a flow now. There was a great stillness earlier in the spiritual path for me, but it feels like a flow, like an emptiness flowing, like a flowing, So to get married, I mean, we got back together, and I knew, I was like, oh, I'm like, we're getting married. And within a few months, he asked me to marry him, and let's do it. And
I knew you were going to say that to me. I mean, I knew that you were going to tell me that like it was on like Donkey Kong, because when you're in a different space like that, things happen. They just unfold.
Yeah. And you know what's true and what isn't. So you can intuit what is, no, this is truth, living, I guess what's a better way to put it? It's like, this is truth revealing itself to me in the most true way it possibly can through form, is this relationship. So of course, but then other things would reveal themselves and I'd be like, no, right.
So I always ask my guests at the end of the show, what the name of the show is Everything You Think You Know Is Wrong. Because when I started having these experiences, it was one of the first thoughts I had, like, my God, everything I thought I knew is totally wrong. I've been like living in opposite land, because I had a new truth, a new reality. So I always ask my guests, what was it in your life that pre-experience, post-experience, that you realized, oh my God, I had it all backwards?
Well, I really feel like mine was a path of what I'm not, of, what is it? Neti maybe that just, nope, not that, not that, not that, not that, not that. And just everything just falls away more and more and more and more. Not that, not that. Revealing that we are the great mystery, which can never be totally knowable. But I would say the biggest, I am not, that I found was, I'm not a piece of shit. Like that.
I'm God.
There you go. Ding, 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 ding. With that unity shift at that retreat, that's why I laughed so much, because I was like, oh my God, I am not other than God.
Right.
And so therefore I'm not this piece of shit that I always thought I was.
Right. And that's pretty funny when you think about it, because you're like, my whole life I thought I was a ding dong, and actually, like, I'm divine.
Yeah. And even my ding dongness is a divine. It is divine. Because when you come from, kind of these troubled backgrounds, your sense of self that gets developed is, I mean, at least it did for me and for a lot of people that I work with, it is that there's something wrong with you. There's something flawed with you. And just to realize, oh my God, I'm not an a-hole. I'm not some jerk. I'm actually God. And so is everyone.
I hope that you have a comedy routine about this, because it's amazing.
For those of you who have been listening, and we haven't talked about comedy at all, I am a stand-up comedian. I have this show called The Divine Mess Show that I take around. Well, not lately with what's going on, being in lockdown, but I take it around, where it's a comedy show and it ends with a guided meditation with healing energy. And I am able to talk about some of this stuff when I have audiences like that. When I have an audience like, at the Hollywood Improv or the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory or something like that, I found that I can't talk about that stuff, because then I lose them and they're kind of confused. So you got to read the room. So what I'm hoping is that there will be more and more audiences that want to laugh at stuff like this. So
there's more and more people having these experiences. It's growing. So I'm pretty confident that you're going to have lots of people in your audience that are going to get it.
I think so.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I feel like I could talk to you forever.
I feel like I could talk to you forever.
Can I move into your living room, please?
Let's do it when this quarantine's over. Hey, honey, we're having a roommate. She's coming. She's moving in.
She has a Chihuahua. She will be moving.
We have a Chihuahua.
You do?
Oh my God. I don't know. I post about her on social media. She has such an attitude. Does your Chihuahua have an attitude?
Oh, absolutely. She's almost 16 and she will kick your ass. Like, she'll just be like, don't touch me.
Yeah. It's like Abby. Abby's like, back off. And then when she's ready to be petted, she'll let you know. She's like, that's a cat. Well, her best friend is a cat. We have a cat. So.
And she gets along with the cat?
They love each other. They cuddle. And I think she tolerates him cuddling her.
They grew up together?
He grew up with her, but she had a cat before. Notice I say Abby had a cat. The dog had a cat. It's not our cat. Abby had the cat. Yeah, Abby the Chihuahua grew up with cats, and then they passed away, and then we got a new kitten a couple of years ago, and they've been inseparable. So
because my dog will not tolerate other creatures. She will not. It's her way or the highway, and I have surrendered to that.
You have surrendered to that.
I have.
I like that.
I let Frida run the show, and I'm totally.
And she's walking back and forth. I see her.
She's just like roaming the area.
Yeah.
So
she's cute. Oh my gosh, you were so fun to talk to.
Thanks again for being on the show. I've been thinking about you for so many years now, stalker.
Oh, I love it. No, I love watching. Seeing your posts and finding out what you're doing. And were you going to move to LA?
Northern California.
Oh, Northern California. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that was why you were there.
That's why I was there, but I'm not there now because things got crazy.
I know.
But I go to LA, so I'm going to see you in person.
Yeah. Let's do it, girl. All right. You have a wonderful night.
Thanks,
so
Sarah.
Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Thanks for joining me this week. If you're digging what I'm throwing down, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening app. I'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode featuring another killer conversation about how to start living a transformed life.